Good morning, everyone. I just want to welcome you to this, our DIVERSIFY session for 2023. My name is Lauren Steedley. I serve as that of Vice President for Diversity and Inclusive Growth here at the Chattanooga Area Chamber of Commerce. I just want to welcome you guys back. This is the first time we've been in person for like 3 years. Now, so thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself real quick as I go through this. So right now, speaking to you, I can speak to you, but if I look down, I can read. But when that light right there, I have to do like that. So don't take it anywhere but that. But just by way of just moving through the program, I just want to thank our generous sponsors for this event. In terms of our presenting sponsors, Blue Cross Blue Shield Tennessee, and I can't say enough about their support with regards to our work and our ongoing partnership. With regards to our platinum sponsors, we're talking about EPB, thank you very much, Sandler Training, P&C Construction, and our gold sponsors are Chattanooga Airport, Izell Marketing, Food City, First Horizon Bank, Pinnacle Financial Partners, Unum, Shasta Group, Truist, and Volkswagen of Chattanooga. Please join me in thanking our sponsors with a round of applause, please. I'd like to also thank our strategic partners here today. The work that the Chamber does requires strong collaboration, and there's no doubt about that. We're proud of our work with our partners. We're doing what we think that many people in the room are committed to and involved to in this process. We appreciate the support for our many elected officials here today in the city, county, state, and federal levels. Couldn't do some of this work without you. Thank you for your collaboration and support. And I'm just going to walk off right now. Then we're going to bring up our next person in terms of our brief introduction. I want to introduce April Lomax from Blue Cross Blue Shield. She's going to give some comments. And I'm going to tell you real quick about April and Blue Cross Blue Shield. I thought about this because when you do this planning, you have a whole year to think about it. So recently, I was just thinking about April's partnership with us. I reached out to April and I asked, like, we need to do a DEI session. We're going to do a forum, and we're doing something on neurodiversity. April volunteered to help us. I went to her last minute, talking to her about our DEI peer group. I said, April, can you help out? She did it. I turned around, April had written an article, ended up getting it published through our Trend publication. So it's that type of partnership, that type of appreciation that I just want to take this special moment to thank April. And with that, I'll bring up April Lomax. And April serves as the Director of Workforce Development for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee. April.
That probably means Lauren is going to schedule a coffee with me next week and ask for something else. So I look forward to it, Lauren. No, it really does take, it takes a village to do this work. Good morning, good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be with you, and I want to thank you for joining us today. As Lauren mentioned, I am April Lomax, the Director of Workforce Diversity at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee. When Lauren asked me to kick this off, I thought about like what would be the best thing to get us in the moment for what is to come. And it really is a question that came to me, which is, what is each of our roles as we think about cultivating diversity, equity, inclusion, for some of us on the journey, cultural competency? What does it take to advance that in the role that we're in now? Who do you need to meet with? What conversations do we need to have? What data do we need? What outside external speaker do we need to bring in to have some of those conversations? And so that's what I think is the question that's kind of burning in my head, and probably for some of you all as we think about today's session. At Blue Cross, though, diversity and inclusion is more than just a corporate responsibility initiative. We talk about it, we believe it to be a core component of how we compete as a health insurer. It allows us to build a workforce that is reflective of our customers, and by extension, to be able to serve them better because we have that diversity. We firmly believe that this approach, and it's very intentional, makes us a stronger organization, more successful at delivering on our mission of bringing peace of mind through better health to our members and in the communities and the partnerships that we have with our neighbors. And I think it's important to say that our commitment to diversity and inclusion, it starts with our leadership team. Our CEO, all of his direct reports have diversity goals that are tied to compensation. So when you think about the philosophy, then the system, then the process that makes all of this work, that is an important piece to call out. Additionally, our board of directors is also actively involved in our work, which I know that's saying a lot, and a lot of us have that experience in this work. They help set our goals, but also hold us accountable to pursuing them and meeting those goals. They can be both an inspiration and also support when we think about how we make progress, meaningful progress, and not just movement in some of the things that we're doing. And our commitment does not stop there. I think a big piece of the conversation that we're talking about later on is this idea about how do we create environments where all people can come into our workplaces, do the work that they do, and thrive. What does it take? And I think all of us are sitting in that question now, especially with the way that we're working now. That's something that we're asking too. One of the ways, though, that we meet that goal or we think about doing that better is what opportunities are we providing people to really get to know and understand the people who they're working with. All of us bring who we are to the workplace, and so providing those opportunities for people to learn and grow and get to know each other is really important to us. And I think I'd be remiss if I did not talk a little bit about our supplier diversity initiative. In 2021, we spent more than $85 million in diverse business. That's an important statistic that I wanted to share, and I think it could be both a challenge and a charge for all of us to consider what is the work in that space, because it is really important, as I have had and learned through Lauren and his work and the work that the Chamber is doing, just how important those dollars are. Ron Harris, who I'm sure a lot of you know, is a mentor friend, also my boss. He's the Vice President of Workforce Diversity at Blue Cross, and he likes to say that we are a mature diversity and inclusion company, and we still have a lot of work to do, which is why we sponsor and have conversations with people like Lauren, with organizations like the Chamber, because we really do believe in coming to events like this to learn from you all, but also to think about what is it going to take for us to move this work forward and be in conversation with people who are also committed toward that goal. So with that, I hope that you all walk away inspired. It takes a lot to bring a group of people like this together to talk about this conversation at a time like now. But I hope that it's also a challenge for us to think about what might it take to move this forward. What is your role in the business organization that you are in to have a conversation about this work, to move it forward, to really dig deep, and to think about how you might participate in the work that is going on now. So thank you to Lauren, to the Chattanooga Chamber for the event today, and for Jennifer Stanley, who's going to talk to us in a fireside chat later on. But lastly, thank you for being here and being an active participant in this conversation and in the work that we're trying to do to better our region. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, April. Can we get another round of applause for April, please? And before I encourage you to enjoy this wonderful lunch that we have prepared here, I just want to say, again, just a special shout out to Blue Cross Blue Shield. Thank you for setting the stage with an inspiring message, and thank you for your very invaluable support. We'll be back in about 15 minutes for the fireside chat, so talk amongst yourselves, and we'll talk to you shortly. Welcome back, everyone. I just want to dive into our main event here. Again, I want to thank you for your participation. I want to thank you for your attendance today. I also want to thank you for your support. So without further delay, I just want to have the opportunity just to give a brief introduction to today's speaker, and then sort of touch and dive right into our conversation. Jennifer Staley brings more than 20 years of experience specializing in sales and services ranging from industries, from financial services, software distribution, and driven businesses. Jennifer holds a Master's of Science from the London School of Economics. She's a Rhodes Scholar. She attended the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. That's hard for a University of South Carolina alumni to say. I just want to put that out there. And as a proud Chattanooga native, it is indeed a privilege for me to welcome her to the stage, and let's have a conversation. Jennifer.
Great. Hi, everyone.
Just want to jump into this conversation. We know that McKinsey & Company put out a report back on women in the workplace in 2022. And just want to get an idea where that even started, why that came about, and what is the intent in terms of where we go from here with that?
Sure, thanks. So my firm, McKinsey & Company, we do an annual report. So 2022 was the 7th year. We're now in our 8th year. It's released usually late October of every year, and we partner with leanin.org on it. And even though it's called Women in the Workplace, we actually track the experiences of men as well. But the reason it started was because there were a lot of myths about what was the experience that women were having in corporate and nonprofit America and organizations in North America. Maybe some of you in the room might know some of these myths, like women just don't want to be in positions of power. That's why we don't see so many women CEOs. Or women are opting out because of childcare and they just don't, want to take on heavy workloads. And for those of us who, this is our life experience, we were looking at each other going like, no, that's not true, but there was no data to really prove it. So we got together with leanin.org and committed ourselves to providing, it is the world's largest repository and longitudinal data set of the experience of women in the workplace, so that we actually have a fact base from which to have these kinds of conversations.
Thank you, thank you. And I know when I was reviewing the report itself, a couple of things stood out most for me, and we've seen this as a recent development given the pandemic. Well, flexibility being one of those things, and remote work. Maybe you could let us know or talk to us a little bit more about that.
Sure. I mean, it's really changed the game, honestly, for people who are in industries where remote work, hybrid work, work from home is a possibility, and not all of us are. That's not everyone's experience. I think that's an important thing to acknowledge. But one of the big learnings was that women and men equally really like the opportunity to engage in more of a hybrid model. So when we asked respondents what their preferred kind of working arrangement was for those who could actually work from home, we typically heard that on average, women would say 3.5 days from home, a day at the office. Men would typically say half and half, 2.5 days at home, 2.5 in the office. But it was a very pronounced difference, unsurprisingly, if you were a caregiver at home to either young children, elderly parents, siblings, someone in your life that you had extra responsibility for, and even more pronounced if you didn't have help, right? So if that was the case, almost universally men and women would say 4+ days work from home is meaningful. And by the way, we now have data from 3 years, 2.5 years of a pandemic to show we can actually be just as productive doing that. And I think that was the game changer for employers, was to see that maybe this assumption of if you're working from home, you won't get things done, you can't be productive, actually did not hold true.
Absolutely. Okay, good stuff. Now, I know one of the themes that came up and really resonated with me was this whole, because of this new work environment, the significance and even the support of managers. And it was twofold. One, we had a discussion earlier today. If you guys missed it, shame on you. With the breakout session, those who attended know that Alethea Silcott did an awesome job this morning. Awesome job. She did a great job. But one of the things that comes up with this manager's question is that she spoke about the broken rung with regards to the ladder. And then also, too, for women to get into these positions, he talked about microaggression and its impact on folks being able to ascend. Maybe you can chat a little bit more about the significance of managers on both levels.
Sure, happy to. Is it helpful for me to talk a little bit about the broken rung first for anyone who might not know what we're referring to? So when we use the phrase broken rung, we're referring to the stage. You can look at it as like a sideways ladder or pipeline, but that first stage out of an entry-level position into a first management role in an organization. And 8 years and now in our 8th year of data, that first entry-level position, we've actually seen a lot of movement. We're almost at parity in North America in terms of gender equality. So half and half, women and men come into entry-level positions. But at that first manager promotion, women drop off much more significantly than anywhere else in the pipeline. So even, for example, if we're seeing that women are making gains from the senior management into the C-suite, which is fantastic, we still can't catch up if we don't solve that kind of, we call it the broken rung at that first promotion to manager. So a lot of the solution lies in figuring out what can be done to better support people, all people, who are going for that first management experience. And as it turns out, again, unsurprisingly, but the data helps us to kind of frame how important it is, the managers of those managers and how they behave in an inclusive or a non-inclusive way. You mentioned microaggressions. It makes such a big difference, because if your first experience as a manager is of not feeling included in those ranks, not being supported, not being sponsored and apprenticed, given sufficient opportunity to grow, given feedback, sometimes it can be tough feedback, but you've got to hear it, it is very difficult to continue to succeed. And so the support for the people coming into that role and staying in those roles is really incredibly important. And we do often hear that that's where microaggressions tend to be the most frequently reported. Why? I actually don't know the answer to that. Maybe we'll find that out in the report this year, but they do.
Awesome. And I think it kind of feeds into my follow-up question on this. It seems like training with regards to some of the managers is a big concern, particularly those who they're reporting to. And then the incentives on why you put performance measures behind the success and failure of folks who are coming into management opportunities. Maybe you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure, training is important. I would say one of the most, maybe the most critical types of training, and I know a number of you in organizations here do this regularly, is training on unconscious bias and how it can show up in different areas in our organization, whether that's in recruiting and interviewing for people coming into positions, if you're giving feedback, if you're even just putting like a team together for a project. Are you unintentionally looking for people who are just like you because that's what you're comfortable with, which is, I mean, it's not a malicious intent, but it happens. And that's right, you know, how we end up perpetuating kind of groups where you would say maybe they're not as diverse or not as inclusive. So for sure, training on things like unconscious bias, very important. But I also think kind of the informal teaching and experiencing that goes on in organizations is really important as well. Because if you ask me what's the single best and biggest solution we could all walk out of here today and like individually influence in our organizations that doesn't have to do with policy, it would be sponsorship. And what you do to sponsor people who are a little bit different from you and how many people you sponsor in your organization. That solves a lot more of the problem than any formal program actually could.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And this brings me to another question. It's I refer to him as the dean of DE&I in Chattanooga. I had a conversation with Ron Harris over at Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Is he here today?
You know, he didn't make it. So it's, and this is that question around accountability. He and I had this conversation about how performance measures are tied to accountability and performance. And so I just wanted to get your take in terms of, is that something more that we're going to see as a trend? What are some of the sort of takeaways, best lessons, et cetera?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren, for following up on that. Absolutely, it's a trend. We see it even like for public companies in particular. Boards are demanding more of executive compensation get tied to actual outcomes around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're starting to see in organizations as a condition for advancement into senior positions of leadership that the groups that you have been managing, you have been doing so with an eye toward DEI and how balanced and inclusive your teams are. There are a number of companies actually put into place, I call it like, it's like the win-win in terms of bonuses for managers, because if you are getting a bonus for having met or exceeded certain goals on DEI, chances are you have also met or exceeded your financial objectives, because we absolutely know that gender diverse and ethnically diverse organizations will by far, like by a factor of anywhere from 25 to 36%, by far outperform another organization or another business unit in your own organization than groups that are not ethnically or gender diverse. So if you are encouraging that as a leader in whatever area you control, you will have a better financial outcome. And if your pay is tied to that, that's win one.
Absolutely.
Right? And if you are actually advancing DEI, that's win two. So I'm seeing a lot more of like those types of economic incentives coming into play as well.
That's fantastic. And I think I go back to a couple of things that came up we had in promotion of this event. Jennifer and I were on WTC, and we talked a little bit about that onlyism. And maybe you can just share with us a little bit about that.
Onlyism. You know, it's funny, like, for something I experienced for so long in my career, I didn't know that there was a word for it until somebody actually said it. You are the only person of a certain type in the room. And I do think sometimes we may tend to not think about just like how actually diverse being an only can be, because it is about not just about gender or race or scholastic background, for example. It can be economic background. It can be your social background. It can be your experiences in life. And if you're in a room and you are the only of a bunch of those things put together, it can actually be a really lonely place. And I was actually reflecting, Lauren, on my own experience. I, for sure, was the only woman in the room for probably, I would say, 90% of the time in the first 10 years of my career. I did a lot of work with clients in industrial organizations. There weren't a lot of people in my own company who did the kind of work that I do, so like it was a fact of life. And while it didn't hold me back, the thing that it did do, and I think still holds true for people who would say they experience this today, is you don't see people that you can easily ask, like the obvious question of even things like, what should I wear? Like, I was forever looking around going, I cannot show up to this meeting in khakis and a golf shirt, but that's what everybody else has on, and there's no other woman here for me to ask. Like, what do I do?
Right.
I know, people know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. But when that happens over and over again, so magnify that by like 10, 20 times a day, things like that are running through folks' heads. Like, that's not an employee at their most efficient, effective, and included. So something is missing out. Now, does that mean that people will not be successful? No. Does that mean there is intentional discrimination? Of course not. But it does mean that people can't actually bring their full self to work. And I think that is why doing something to tackle onlyism helps organizations so much, because it gives people more freedom. And in giving people more freedom, they can actually, take a little bit more risk. They can innovate more. They can try things that will benefit themselves and the organization.
Thank you. And I think with this report too, it's all about a purpose. So there's the recommendations that came out of this, and we talk about this whole space in terms of DEI, and it is about productivity and profit. And what were some of the takeaways in terms of recommendations from the study as well?
Yeah, thanks. Maybe I'll break it into three, because yes, for sure, we can link being successful with DEI in an organization to productivity and to profitability. But importantly, I think maybe even more importantly, we can also link it to employee satisfaction, keeping the employees that you want to keep in your organization, attracting the kinds of employees that you'd like to attract. So there's a lot there around like undesired attrition going down in organizations that address these types of issues. That's for sure important. We also see, and April, thank you for mentioning this, that you can actually lift up more than your own organization. You can lift up a community. You can lift up a supply chain. You can lift up an ecosystem by paying more attention to who you're doing business with in terms of suppliers. You can pay more attention in terms of how you're reaching more customers if you've got more employees that look like your customer base. So, stepping way back, like a vehicle for growth, for revenue growth for an organization, for economic growth for a community and a region, is actually intimately tied to how well the underlying organizations that are part of that community look beyond their own four walls and embrace DEI, and the data bears that out as well. You consistently see job growth, employee retention, employee satisfaction and engagement, even more important than satisfaction, go up in organizations and communities where you have more attention to DEI.
Thank you. And I have to say, because you're local and you're familiar with the area, are there like one or two sort of takeaways from the study that you think that as our employers here in the city would most benefit from, or maybe some places we can focus attention on? And that's not
Yeah.
one of those stage questions, so we're ready for this.
You've kind of given me twists on all of them, Lauren. So this was not. He's doing a good job here. Actually, there's one that I would love to talk about because I was reading this morning. A good friend of mine is the CEO. I was reading on LinkedIn this morning. A good friend of mine is the CEO of Republic Services. For those of you who don't know, or I shouldn't say good friend anymore, but he used to be because he worked with me at my company, and now he's there. Those of you who don't know Republic Services, they're an environmental solutions company. They do waste collection and also recycling, and they announced that they were doing away with a requirement of a college degree for the vast majority of all jobs within Republic Services in North America. Some of you may have heard that requirement, we refer to that now as a paper ceiling, and the idea being, right, that what somebody did maybe 20 or 30 years ago at college, how relevant is that to the skills, to the capabilities, to the attitude, to what they've demonstrated that they can excel at in the jobs that they've had? So for people in vocations and technical fields and apprenticed fields, actually this could be a huge way to have a much more diverse workforce if we maybe step back and ask the question, is a college degree keeping out otherwise really talented people who we might want to attract to our organization? So that would be one area that I would encourage folks to look at, this notion of the paper ceiling. I don't think we talk enough about diversity in terms of educational diversity, and this would be one area. And by the way, not to say, and I taught at UTC, I love UTC, I love UTK, college degrees, community college, they remain important, of course, right? That is, the people who have achieved that in their lives, that's an important success. It's just not the only way to demonstrate success. And by lifting those requirements, I think you automatically open up opportunity to a whole new population of people that might otherwise have been excluded. So that would be one, I would say, for our region that could be quite important, just given the number of folks who are in the workforce, want to be in the workforce, who don't have those degrees. And then the second thing I would say, I really want to come back to the sponsorship point because the data is so incredibly clear. And when I say sponsorship, by the way, I distinguish sponsorship and mentorship, Lauren. A mentor is someone who's going to take you to coffee and listen to your woes and tell you it'll be okay and maybe offer you some advice. A sponsor creates an opportunity, brings you into a new project, helps, speaks up for you in terms of a promotion, really sets the stage for you to move to that next part of your career. And then if you don't want to walk through the door, you're nervous to walk through the door, they shove you through the door and then they help you on the other side of it, right? That's a sponsor.
Right.
In our research, when we look at senior male leaders and senior female leaders, and we also ask the question of the people who report up to them, how well do you feel supported? How well do you feel sponsored? Are you getting these opportunities? What we see, and this may not surprise some of you in the audience, is that on average, a male senior leader will sponsor 3.5 white men. They will sponsor 2.5 white women, half an FTE from a man of color, and half for a woman of color. When we look at women leaders, they actually will sponsor 6.5 white men, 4.5 white women, 3.5 men of color, 3.5 women of color. So they are demonstrating that you can actually take on a load that is inclusive, that more fairly represents the rough balance that exists typically in organizations, and they are sharing the love, I guess is a good way to put it, across everyone. And so I would say, if you could just imagine for yourselves, as all of us are leaders in our own organizations, who are you sponsoring, and what does your data look like? If you looked more like the average female senior leader, you would almost solve the broken rung in a nutshell at your organization just by virtue of changing your own behavior. So that, I would say, is an important takeaway.
This is awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank
Sure.
you very much. What I'd like to do, first, let me just get a round of applause for our speaker.
Thank you.
This is excellent information, and I think definitely our members will value it and take it forward. What I'd like to do is kind of open it up for a few questions. I'm going to take my glasses. Now I can really see the audience because I couldn't see it with that glare. This I could take a couple of questions. This is based on the content and some of the comments that Jennifer provided. Are there questions from the audience?
Such a quiet crowd, Lauren. And I know that is not true normally. Yes, I see we have one over here. We've got microphones. Yeah, there we go, running around. Perfect.
I guess I'll start it off. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah? When you mention women of color, I work a lot with the Latino community here in the Chattanooga area and with, also in Dalton. And I founded my own non-for-profit specifically for Latina women because we weren't seeing that support when it comes to, that advancement in career or sponsorship. When you mention women of color, can you break that down? Like, what is it, African-American women, Latina women, and so forth?
So yes, yes, and yes. So when we refer to women of color, we have subpopulations that we're tracking in the data. I would say that by and large, the answers are similar with some distinction, and I don't have the time right now to get into the distinction. I should tell you, if you want to see the most recent report, womenintheworkplace.org, all one word, and you can actually break down for the experience of Latinas relative to Black women, relative to others. We also track the experience of LGBTQ+ and intersectionality as well, so you can see differences in communities depending on how you group the data. I will say that women of color as an entire group, so the summation of all of that, it breaks my heart because that is the group that most struggles and most suffers with that broken rung that I was mentioning, Lauren. So when, on average, the drop-off rate for women in general from entry level to first manager is like a 10-point drop. So you imagine you go from 50-50 share of the population to a 40-60 share relative to men. For women of color, it's like a triple drop. So the solutions that may work in general will likely not work to shift the needle as much for women of color unless those solutions are I think they need to be far more inclusive. So even though I mentioned a couple today, you can imagine that it is not just sponsorship, but it's actual active recruitment. It's setting up programs to offer leadership and manager training with cohorts where perhaps onlyism would not be an issue, so you can feel free to ask the questions or raise the topics that are more relevant to your experience, your community's experience. Like, there's a whole host of solutions that I think need to be taken together for that group of women, that group in particular. Thank you for asking that question.
Jennifer, you talked about the sponsorship and the versus mentorship. I got two questions. What's the difference in mentoring and sponsoring? And why are so many women sponsoring more people than men?
So thank you so much for that question. So I'll try to maybe sum up the differences. A mentor will talk to you about opportunity. A sponsor creates the opportunity. Like, the sponsor makes it happen. So if I think about in my own life, I've actually had way more male sponsors than I've had female sponsors in my own career. And I define those moments as, Jennifer, we need someone to lead our sales practice in North America. Would you be interested? And now, and by the way, I'm going to share with you what it was like for me, the man who ran it for the previous 10 years. And I'm going to help train you, and I'm going to help introduce you, and I'm going to make sure that you get the support that you need. That was my sponsor. I had another male friend who was like, whoa, you're getting ready to run one of our biggest practices in the firm. Like, good luck. Tell me if you need someone to share war stories with, or just a shoulder to cry on. And by the way, I called him up too and had those conversations. But the nugget of the difference is creating the opportunity for someone to do something more than they had been. That's a sponsor. Why are women sponsoring more in organizations than men? I think the answer, I don't mean it to sound this simple, but it might actually be, is that because we're under-sponsored ourselves. So when we finally get into positions of leadership, and I'll speak for myself here, I sponsor way more than the average in our Women in the Workplace report because I remember what it was like to be an only, to be looking for sponsors and not finding them. And then once I found them, and they were men, what they did for me and what they did for my career. And so that is my way of paying it back. And so I don't think it's because men are intentionally saying, I don't want to be a sponsor. Like, no, there's no malintent here at all. It's more because most of them have a very different experience than a woman of a particular generation would have otherwise had. That's pretty much why.
I have a question right here.
Hello.
You talked about microaggressions, just talked about it a little bit. Could you talk more about that and possibly microaffirmations as well?
So sorry, she's asking to talk more about microaggressions. Are you looking for like a definition, or like how does it hold people back? Yes. Maybe I'll give an example for myself. How about that? That might be the best way to define it, is you kind of know it, when you see it. I remember the very first project where I was in charge, like I was the one leading it, and I walked into the room and two people turned to me and like gave me their Starbucks order. And I was like,
Ouch.
yeah, like that's a microaggression. That might even be a macroaggression. Yeah. But right, like the assumption, right, that the only woman walking through the room is going to be taking the Starbucks order. So that would be one. Or things like, I mean, wow, for a person of fill in the blank, you sound more eloquent than I expected you to. Or I know, but it happens, and most of the time it's happening. People aren't saying it because they're trying to be mean. They're just they're honestly reflecting something that's going on in their head. But when that happens, when those microaggressions happen, what the knock-on effect is usually twofold, and I'm not going to remember this data off the top of my head, but I know one is that employee engagement and satisfaction drops, and when employee engagement and satisfaction drops, you tend to lose talented people. So it creates a talent management issue for an organization. The converse, and thank you for asking about microaffirmations, is also true, right? That you can have more satisfied, more engaged employees when they hear and are affirmed for even the smallest contributions. So a small contribution could be something like, I appreciate you taking the notes today, Jennifer. I'll do it next time so that the load doesn't always fall on you. That would be an example of a microaffirmation. And when we see that in organizations, people tend to feel more included, and like the burden isn't always falling to me. They feel more seen because they are more seen. Like we are actually, by speaking the affirmation, recognizing what is unique and what is to be celebrated about that individual. So if I think back to your question too, Lauren, on what can we do with training, and I said it's not always formal training. It can just be the behaviors that we encourage and that we repeat and we role model. Role modeling microaffirmations is one way to get after that. Sure, thank you.
You have a question in the back.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for sharing with us today. But I have a question. What about pay equity as we look at maybe Hamilton County? Do you have any data on that? Or can you share any information on that?
I mean, I could be here forever talking about pay equity. Lauren, maybe for the question that's specific to Hamilton County, I'll kick it to you, and then I'm happy to add some color commentary.
Yeah, I think at this point, I mean, one of the processes that we're going through, we're learning, we're moving, we're looking at best practices. We're seeing the correlation between those who implement certain practices, their return on investment. We're looking at the productivity and turning increased productivity, increased profit for those organizations who are more inclusive in their practices. So I think much of it, and this is all about almost like creating a movement, right, around how do you look at more productive, inclusive organizations, where you look at organizations who are in place, putting policies in place with the express purpose of being able to look at data and understanding that productivity is profitable. And then they're able to do it, and they're able to expand on it. And hopefully industries, organizations begin to duplicate with the express purpose that at the end of the day, I too will be successful in my business. And one of the things I also would like to throw back on is going to change a lot in where we are in terms of demographics. As the country continues to move forward, everybody in this room knows that it's going to be increasingly black and brown in terms of going forward. So if you look at the global population, what that really means in terms of some of these applied practices, you're looking at access to cultural competency is going to be critical to who you're dealing with. If you're talking about logistics, if you're talking about anything that deals with supply chain, who you're going to be dealing with, that level of engagement is going to determine your success or failure. And everybody at the chamber is about to smirk when I say this, because they know I'm about to say that Blockbuster at one point was a successful company, and they didn't pay attention to the technology, and they didn't pay attention to the customer. So now they're out of business. So I think it's a matter of just sustainability. You can choose to do nothing, but at the end of the day, others are going to walk down the street, and they're going to find that level of fulfillment in their organization. They're going to feel valued. They're going to feel a sense of belonging, and those are the organizations that will win.
Thanks, Lauren. If I could maybe add one piece to those important comments, which is that pay equity is not the same thing as equal pay. And this often gets confused. Pay equity, if I'm understanding the question correctly, refers to making sure that people are paid for similar scope of responsibility and similar outcome. So, even taking, again, myself as an example, should I be paid exactly the same as a male counterpart or another female counterpart who's a partner in my organization? Maybe, maybe not. It actually kind of depends on what our responsibilities are and what outcomes are that we're driving. Now, should we have equal opportunity for pay equity? Yes. And I think that the structure underneath which pay gets determined and the access to that pay at different levels of an organization and in different job roles and categories in an organization is the place to tackle it, because then you end up getting pay equity.
I saw a hand in the back there.
I think we have time for one more.
One more? Okay. Everyone, this is the last question.
Sure. First of all, thank you. This has been great. In light of all the detail that you've talked about and the fact that this was all somewhat precipitated on a report, how important do you think corporate disclosure is in talking about the work that's going on, and what do you think the most effective ways of getting information out that's relevant to the DE&I and equity and other programming like this is for helping other businesses learn and helping other constituents and stakeholders understand the work that's going on?
Thanks so much for that question. I wouldn't say it's important. I would say it's essential. It's essential. And by the way, it's not easy to be transparent. Like almost any organization, if you look hard enough, and in some places you don't have to look that hard or that far, you will see that there are issues that are obvious for that organization. But if you're not willing to kind of confront the facts, like how would you ever make any progress? And so some of the companies that have shared, like, what have we done, and we report on this each year in the report as well, to get better in our own organization, it stemmed from getting honest with themselves about, like, what's the reality of the experience that people in our own company or our own organization are having. And once you face that reality, you can then actually choose what to go do about it. So I would say that without that, and that's another reason why we published this report, is just to give some transparency to the reality of people's experience in the workforce in North America, and to give companies a basis from which to work. So whether that is reporting in your annual report, it's reporting in individuals' own performance scorecards, it's for your business unit, it's for your division. Yes, 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 and yes. The more transparent all organizations are, I think the faster we'll solve some of these problems.
And the only thing I would add, because I got two Gen Zers back at my home, this is what they look for.
Oh, they won't tolerate you.
Exactly. They're looking for those scorecards. So if you fall short, that sense of belonging, that they're bypassed your organization. I don't care what the monetary incentives are. They want to be in an environment where they're valued, where they're seen, and they can see themselves progressing in the organization. And if you do not, they're going to move on to other organizations.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, thank you, guys. So at this point, I just want to thank our speaker again. I want to thank each and every one of you. And at this point, we're going to move on to some closing comments from our president, Charles Wood.
Bringing us into the close, again, definitely want to thank Jennifer Stanley for her wise words and the data that she and McKinsey bring. And I think as someone who spent most of my career in economic development and working with companies as they make really big investment decisions, they look at the data, but they also look at who's in the room. And so I think that's a very important thing from a community perspective as we think about economic development. So Jennifer, thank you for your kind remarks. And I want to thank Lauren Steedley and Darian Scott, who are sitting up here, who've helped put a lot of this together, as well as a number of our staff folks who are involved in this. So Sybil Topol, who's our head of communications, marketing, and engagement, Carrie Beth, Melissa, Yasmin, Caleb, and Abdiel, all who work today. So thank you all very much. I'd also like to ask our board members that are in the room if you guys would stand up just for a moment so we could recognize you, because I know there's a few of you here. I am proud to tell you that I think right now I can say that the Chamber's board is more diverse than it has ever been in history. The Chamber's staff is more diverse than it has ever been in history. And our new class, which is coming in starting July, is a great group. We have some incredible business leaders from across the community, and it is incredibly diverse. So it is 50% male, 50% female, 40% people of color. It was a very intentional process with our nominating committee to go through that, and our board of directors. And so we appreciate their leadership and support for events like this, programs like this, and kind of the laser focus on the business community and the aspect of what diversity means from a business standpoint. So thank you all for that. I do have to plug our next event, because they're in the chamber world, there's always a next event. And so that next signature event is our federal focus on August 15th. It'll be in the morning. You will see that start to percolate on our calendars out on the web. So hope to see you there. And again, appreciate everybody's involvement and support for this effort. Thank you so much.